Today, we're going to talk about the biggest wasted potential planeswalker in all of Magic the Gathering. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. Today, I had intended originally to talk about what's going on with the Chandra controversy and the comic book cover. If you haven't seen it, I'll put it up on the screen for you. There's a comic book showing Chandra and Tibalt together. And the more I thought about this and looked into things, all of these different pieces of information started coming up. And I looked at Tibalt, and I had only ever looked at Tibalt as the magic card. I had never actually seen the flavor underneath. And I had no idea of how much wasted potential we had here. I absolutely could not believe the situation. So I went and dug up the article where they discussed the creation of Tibalt and go through it step by step. So we're going to take a look at that first, and then afterwards we'll take a look at the card art and the cards connected to them. We'll talk about all the flavor and the missed potential here. All right, here we are in triple vision to represent the 3 videos for today. So let's read through this article here and see how they designed all this. So let's say you decide one day you want to make a 2-mana planeswalker in Avacyn Restored. Hypothetically, how would you go about doing that? Well, taking a look at the block, Innistrad has a black planeswalker and a green planeswalker who's kind of maybe sometimes black when the moon hits him just the right way. Dark Ascension has a white-black planeswalker whose play pattern drifts heavily towards the white end of the spectrum. That means you probably want to make this new walker in blue or red. Both options seem pretty reasonable, so which one do you choose? You probably want your planeswalker to have at least some kind of impact on standard. Taking a look at blue first, you have a whole lot of competition in your 2 slot from some of these bad boys. We can see Snapcaster Mage, Mana Leak, Invisible Stalker, and Phantasmal Image here. The marginal return on your 5th potentially format defining 2-drop is obviously very low. So you decide to turn to red, which isn't doing quite as much on the standard landscape at 2 mana. You're hardly out of the clear though, because there's a 2-mana card that's been a staple of red decks for most of Magic's history that happens to be standard legal at the same time your planeswalker is going to be released. And here we have Incinerate. It's been a while since we've seen Incinerate. That's right, good old deal 3 damage with marginal upside, bread and butter. Mortar to hold bricks, nothing remotely special. Thing is though, one of the reasons Magic has held up for almost 20 years is we try and hold the power level of standard legal cards relatively constant. Sometimes we fail at doing that, but the point is that once you have a card at a particular mana cost that you know is going to get played, you don't really have a lot of room to get much more powerful than that and still have a card be printable. So your 2-mana red planeswalker is going to have to be about as good as an Incinerate. Okay, sure. Doesn't sound that hard, right? Turns out that it really is. The problem is you're constrained along 2 axes: complexity and, for lack of a better word, epicness. The complexity challenge is simply that the more options a given card presents, the more difficult it is to target it exactly to a certain power level. A 2-1 is always going to behave, a 1-white 2-1 is always going to behave as a 1-white 2-1, and it's relatively easy to appreciate how that's going to work under different environmental constraints. But what about a 1-white 1-1 with 1-white tap target creature, or a 1-white 1-1 that dies into a 1-1 spirit? These are all around a similar power level, but the latter 2 are much harder to evaluate and depend far more upon the specific metagame inside which they're introduced. You can imagine then that the problem compounds itself further when instead of 1 ability and 1 set of power and toughness, you have to balance 3 abilities and 3 loyalty costs with a starting loyalty whose optimal floor and ceiling has no precedent. It becomes more and more difficult to hit the bullseye, as it were. The problem of epicness is less easy to define. Essentially, most of the time in Magic, your 2-mana spells are pretty unremarkable. They work along the margins and tend to massage the consistency of your deck a little. It's wholly possible they're among the best cards in your deck. Think Remand, Wall of Roots, Strangleroot Geist, or Fire and Ice. But it's frequently hard to appreciate the extent to which they contribute to your winning the game. In fact, when 2-mana spells obviously define formats, think Raphellos, Stoneforge Mystic, Dark Confidant, or Bitter Blossom, they tend to be overpowered. So the power level target you want to hit for a successful 2-mana card fills, in essence, a similar role to that of a first pick common in a booster draft. The adjective that I'd use to describe both is solid. Unfortunately, planeswalkers are intended to be basically the opposite of solid. They're supposed to be memorable, swingy, dramatic, and awesome. They're supposed to create stories and define gameplay in unique, atypical ways. They're supposed to alter the narrative landscape of the battlefield, announcing their presence in meaningful ways. In short, they really don't want to be 2-mana spells. If you want to make your 2-mana planeswalker work, then you have to try and figure out a way to render it relevant to the gameplay without completely overpowering the board when it hits. You have to capture a kind of epic feel without inducing a prematurely epic play pattern to go along with it. Here's our attempt. Now I'm just going to cover the mechanics of it and we'll look at the card itself in terms of art in a moment. 2 red for a 2 loyalty planeswalker, +1 loyalty, draw a card, then discard a card at random, -4 loyalty, Tibalt the Fiend-Blooded deals damage equal to the number of cards in target player's hand to that player, and -6, gain control of all creatures until end of turn, untap them, they gain haste until end of turn. As you can see, we tried to solve the aforementioned problems in 2 primary ways. By rendering the card relatively narrow, so its power is constrained by the kinds of decks in which you can play it profitably, and, number 2, by trading the immediate benefit of a card like Incinerate for the long-term payoff of cards like Sudden Impact and Insurrection. In other words, you unlock more power the longer you can afford to wait. It's a nice fully blown piece of artwork there. Let's take a look at each of our component parts and see what's going on with this guy. We've already talked about how we're constrained by cards as straightforward as Incinerate at the 2-mana slot. Upping the mana requirements to 2 red instead of 1 red and 1 colorless allows us to cram that much more power into the card, which is important when we're operating as close to the margins as we are with Tibalt. The 2 loyalty. Alright, you got me. 2 loyalty isn't a whole lot, but you're ticking up to 3 almost immediately, meaning you can survive an attack from most early drops just fine. Furthermore, you're red. Roasting tiny dorks is what you do for fun in your spare time. In all seriousness, one of the stealth benefits of most planeswalkers is that because you want to get almost all of them off the board as soon as possible, loyalty functions as a kind of surrogate life gain, and frequently will gain you more than the number written on the card, because most permanents don't deal damage in granular increments one at a time. So you can't pack a whole lot of loyalty onto the cheaper planeswalkers, or they'll all start functioning as mini Loxodon hierarchs in addition to whatever text they possess. Now the first ability. +1, draw a card, then discard a card at random. We've printed 2 3-mana planeswalkers, Jace Beleren and Liliana of the Veil. In both cases, their plus ability is net neutral in terms of card advantage, but a properly constructed deck can bend symmetry in its favor. With Tibalt, we stuck to a similar formula. At its most basic level, you only want to activate Tibalt when you feel the average power level of a card in your deck is greater than the average power level of a card in your hand, thereby upgrading the overall quality of your hand by a marginal amount. Still, the potential upside of such an ability is obvious. If your hand contains nothing but a single basic land, by activating Tibalt, you're essentially up half a card. That's nothing to sneeze at, since you still have a planeswalker sitting on the board. Clearly, though, we're not just going to be operating at level 1. Suppose your deck is full of flashback cards, or for some reason or another, doesn't particularly care whether your spells are in your hand or in your graveyard. In this situation, Tibalt is basically generating a card for you every turn, producing velocity, and ticking up to some of his more potent abilities, namely the -4 ability that deals damage to your opponent equals to the number of cards in their hand. If you can activate Tibalt's second ability even once, you're clearly getting a pretty good deal. Sudden Impact, after all, cost 4 mana and saw a fair bit of tournament play in an era defined by card-drawing spells like Fact or Fiction and hand-swelling effects like Upheaval. Moreover, the exact decks against which this ability functions at its finest are the kind of decks that have substantial problems removing planeswalkers. You do not want to be a blue-black control deck full of card-drawing spells like Think Twice, Forbidden Alchemy, and Consecrated Sphinx, staring down at the business end of a Tibalt. To put it in perspective, Flame Rift is a legacy staple and deals 4 damage to each player. Getting 4 out of Tibalt is a pretty good deal, especially when you enjoy the side benefit of forcing control decks to empty their grips. Of course, Flame Rift is only playable in a certain kind of deck, which is the more narrow but more powerful aspect of where Tibalt kicks in. It's very easy to envision scenarios where you hit much harder than that, particularly if you're helping them out with, hold on, I'm getting a call. All right, let me just skip by this little unnecessary joke here in the middle. Okay, so let's talk about the third ability here. Now here's the real monster, Insurrection. For 2 mana, Obviously, Planeswalker ultimates are designed to be massive beatings, so the above statement is a bit of a misnomer. Furthermore, if your opponents have 4 creatures just sitting there on the board, why in the world aren't they just attacking your Tibalt and ensuring you don't smack them upside the head for 30? It's a valid concern, but again, that's where your powerful but narrow element of a Planeswalker like this comes into play. Maybe you're playing some defense, maybe you've cast a fog type effect on a critical turn, or far more likely, maybe you're up against some kind of Titan deck and you've dropped this guy pretty early, and suddenly the prospect of bashing your face in with a Grave Titan looks a whole lot less appealing. Any way you look at it, it's obvious that an ultimate so powerful it's normally worth 8 mana offers tremendous potential upside when it's tacked to a permanent that hits the board on the second turn of the game. And let's not even get started on the kind of havoc this guy can wreak in multiplayer. So there you have it. Making a 2-mana Planeswalker was one of the most difficult challenges I've been a part of now in my 3 years at Wizards, but I'm pleased with what our efforts produced. Plus, I mean, the guy's half devil, which is pretty sweet in and of itself. But that's just my side of the story. How do y'all plan on using Tibalt? Let me know in the forums. Alright, obviously I guess I didn't need to read that part. Now, let's hop back over to me for the rest of this nonsense. Alright, now that we've talked about the card creation, what I want to talk about now is the actual biography of Tibalt, because this is what I was missing, and this is pretty interesting. So it says, lacking talent and discipline in his necromancy studies, Tibalt became consumed with hatred. His only joys were that of torture and inflicting pain. Counseled by dark forces, he fused his soul with those of devils. Now he delights in hellish agony across the plains. The student of an Innistrad necromancer, Tibalt tried to follow in his master's footsteps, cobbling together and reanimating corpses. For those of you who don't know, there's different versions of creators of zombies on the world of Innistrad. Instead of just standard issue necromancers, you also have the, like, standard issue necromancers are the ones who are like, okay, I'm going to raise you from the dead with magic, bro. And then you have your, I'm Dr. Frankenstein, I'm going to stitch together corpse style necromancers that also exist in Innistrad specifically. So this is the type of Innistrad necromancer that we're dealing with that Tibalt was the assistant of. So he tried to follow in his master's footsteps, cobbling together and reanimating corpses, but he lacked the necessary skills for such exacting work. Nursing a growing seed of hatred, fed by his failure and isolation, he started turning his talents towards the realm of the living. His experiments tested the ability of living organisms to withstand pain, using only vermin at first, but eventually moving on to humans. As if summoned by the evil nature of these new experiments, devils began to gather near Tibalt's laboratory at night, whispering in their strange, chittering tongue. They offered Tibalt insights into what fascinated him most, the true nature of pain. Filled with a new sense of power, Tibalt grew more sadistic and careless. Oblivious to the whisperings of the townsfolk, it was only a matter of time before inquisitors kicked down the door of his lab. Cornered in a room of torture devices, Tibalt should have been executed or jailed for life. Instead, he invoked a potent and hateful spell from the devil's utterances and his own grim discoveries. The spell fused his own essence with theirs at the cost of experiencing all the pain he had inflicted on others. In that moment, Tibalt's planeswalker spark ignited, flinging him across the universe and away from the Inquisitor's blades. Now half-devil, Tibalt is free to practice his art from plane to plane. This is an incredible backstory. I love this. This isn't some, like, honestly, this could easily be a black planeswalker. But the flavor behind this, they're not trying to play him off as some epic great guy. No, this is some craven who couldn't, he was so ineffectual at his job that it broke him, and he ended up so unhappy with it that he ended up torturing small animals to try and get some kind of relief from the misery of his life. And then he moved up onto human beings as well. And he was so twisted that he naturally caused demons to be attracted to him. How much of a twisted human being do you have to be that demons, devils, will be attracted to you? That is absolutely intense. And the idea of him getting so intense with his grim discoveries and these devils around, and there's all this kind of arcane knowledge floating around, and as a result, these police enforcers essentially come in to arrest him, and he's obviously going to get executed. And he essentially does this, like, a pseudo deal with the devil, but instead of it being some powerful demon like Liliana made a pact with multiple demons, it's a bunch of devils that he actually fuses with. So he's not a servant of demons or anything like that. He is literally he's literally fused with these devils, and the concept of feeling all of the pain that you've inflicted on all these people at that moment, that would warp and twist you further. I love the flavor behind Tibalt. It's absolutely insane. And the artwork is really, really nice on this card. When you look at the full extended art version that was available in that article that we scrolled through there, with him standing on that peak above fire and lava with flames just coming out of his hands, it's totally awesome. He looks like he looks like a devil dude, but he totally easily can be half human, half devil. He looks dope, honestly. I think he looks pretty imposing there and intense. It's disappointing that the end result card doesn't live up to the hype and power that is like baked into the story of him, because he's a really cool character. And when you look at the card, his abilities, I mean, I guess the first ability could represent knowledge gained through torture. The second ability definitely feels like the most Tibalt-esque kind of ability in terms of just inflicting pain directly on your opponent. And he gets enjoyment from this pain, and it looks like it's on like some almost psychic vampire level-esque kind of thing that might be like Sodic. That seems to be something that I picked up from the comic book, but we'll talk about that in the video that we're going to do later on, talking about Chandra there. So make sure you come back and check that one out later today, but let's continue on with this card here. So the third ability makes no sense to me. It genuinely, it doesn't tie into like him being fiend-blooded, the devil, his research, or anything. It feels like a powerful effect, yes, but in terms of flavor, it doesn't tie into the card at all, which for me is a loss. Now, Tibalt is one of the least flavor-filled planeswalkers in terms of being given much flavor service outside of his own little blurb. There's only card information about him on 2 different cards outside of what we've already talked about here. One of them is Blightning. They're both from the Sorn versus Tibalt deck, and one of them is Blightning, which I enjoy. I enjoy this one on a couple of levels. I mean, first of all, Blightning is just a powerful spell. The 3 mana to be able to do 3 damage to target player and make them discard 2 cards, that's a solid package. But the flavor text is fantastic as well. In the Spirit of Inquiry, Tibalt applied a battery of agony spells. They yielded nothing on the vampire's whereabouts, but the screams were reward enough. And I like the fact that Tibalt's more interested in inflicting pain than the information gained, or information lost from someone else's mind in this case. And Blightning, because it's damage first and foremost, and the damage happens whether the discard doesn't happen or does happen, it does feel very flavorfully tied to Tibalt. I mean, that red-black feel totally fits in. And then the Browbeat with this incredible artwork. This is amazing. 1 red, 2 colors. Any player may have Browbeat deal 5 damage to him or her. If no one does, target player draws 3 cards. Pain to Defiance or Shameful Surrender. Every reaction is a pleasant surprise. Quote from Tibalt. That's awesome. And the big, cloudy, like, Tibalt screaming face with the intense lightning in it, that's amazing. I really, really enjoy the flavor behind these cards. So overall, it does a good job of transmitting the flavor of Tibalt through the flavor on the cards that were included in the deck, so I like that. The flavor of Tibalt himself is not communicated very effectively on the original Planeswalker card, and the original Planeswalker card is weak, so it feels like the potential has been squandered. So in a way, it's nice to see that they're bringing him in for the comic, because that might give the potential to bring an interesting character with some interesting backstory into this. He makes for a compelling villain to me. There's not a lot to like about him, so it's going to be interesting to see what they do. That's my thoughts on the subject. Now I'm going to share with you, my friends, a new 6 Color of Magic video.
Hi, my name's Uncle Jam. This YouTube live stream wants me to do this, so just remember, together, we are the 6 Color of Magic. Say hi to Perp. Yeah! Let's sing some karaoke.
If you haven't sent in a 6 color clip already, please do so. I absolutely love getting new ones. Also, talking about what I would love if you would come on over and check out my second channel. I've been having a lot of fun over there streaming. I'll be over there today playing some Binding of Isaac, having a good old time, and we're getting closer and closer to that 1,000 subscribers over there to unlock those additional features. I'm loving it. I think we're at like 911. 911, baby. All right, so that being said, The only thing really left to cover is the Golden Lords, because we got a couple new members joining up. So roll that golden scroll, the people who are supporting me on Patreon, and I will welcome our 2 newest members. Cryptic Escape Magazine and Hi, I'm a Merlin. All right, thanks for joining up, boys. Glad to have you on board. We're getting so close to having 100 on Patreon. The 100, but the awesome 100, not like that terrible show. So, what do you want to do now? You want to come on over, check out my other channel? You want to watch some other stuff on this channel while you wait for the second video of the day to come out? Because there's 3 coming, baby. Make sure you're subscribed and come on back.